Now, you may be a little disappointed, but my favorite essay out of all the essays was the introduction. But I guess because being in the world of news and being in Delhi and all about Delhi and politics, wherever there is personal politics meets national politics meets party politics is just extremely interesting to me. So the first, it's not part of the book. It's the introduction where Aatish gives you a peek into his life over the last few years, ever since he was exiled from his own country and his OCI card was taken away. And in fact, he was in Sri Lanka when his grandmother's last rites happened, if I remember correctly. You were 4 days into Sri Lanka, where your mother came and met you then. And yeah, so we'll just get into that. But I would just, there's this line which was interesting and I guess brave. India is a land, Bharat is a people, the Hindus. India is historical, Bharat is mythical. India is an overreaching and inclusive idea. Bharat is exclusionary, and there's a little more on that. Explain what you mean by that, because now I would not recommend you watch Indian news, but if you do, a lot of anchors who regularly are parroting what the party line is in the center have started using the word Bharat. India is just not used when they're referring to the country I'm in right now. What do you mean by that line? And can you just elaborate a little on that?
So two things. One, I would say that every nation, a modern nation, is an imperfect articulation of a culture, of a civilization. So like in some ways, like you can't really always get it right. Like you're sort of like, I think in the founding of India, there was this great sensitivity to the different people and the different communities that had become part of an Indian ethos, that had become part of the kind of Indian multiplicity. And I think the name India, which is in a funny way also like it's a kind of almost a metaphor for the country seen through the gaze of outsiders, because you have this like history of the word, the etymology of the word as it travels from Iran into Greek, into Latin, and it becomes this sort of symbol of the outside gaze, which I think is part of the beauty of it, but it's also part of the tension of it. And it's why it's so easy to weaponize that word, because it basically speaks to Indian plurality, but it also speaks to this experience of being seen by outsiders. And in a country like India, which has a history of invasion, of course, like that word is very charged. At the same time, this notion of Bharat, especially as it's being used in political language, is a notion of historical purity. It's a kind of fantasy of wanting to scrape away the different layers of historical accretion in India to get to an imagined idea of what we were before we were seen by the other, before we were changed by the gaze of the outsider. And so you have like this, and that is a dangerous fantasy. I mean, you're never going to be, that kind of idea of purity is a total illusion. So in a sense, like you have like this very charged argument where I understand when people feel, oh, India represents this, but what do they want? What do they imagine is possible in this sort of, this idea, which is again, like, it's very central. Like when I'm talking about a return to self, the title comes from Ali Shariati responding to Frantz Fanon. And he's basically saying, after the long night of colonization, we will return to ourselves, to a pure culture, to a time before the European had intruded. And in every case, that return is a violent exercise. It's an exercise in historical illusion, in historical fantasy, and it's never going to be something that's actually attainable.